Peter Hunt, welcome into the weeds, mate. It's an absolute privilege to have you on.
My pleasure.
You are a captain of industry. You are a lawyer. You are an incredibly successful businessman and philanthropist operating across a whole range of areas, and AM recognised for it. But you're also an incredible advocate and pioneer for psychedelic-assisted therapy. So it's going to be a really interesting opportunity to talk to you about that.
Yep, look forward to it.
How did you come to this position? I mean, you came out to Australia, you're involved in industry. Why are you so passionate about psychedelics and the therapeutic benefit they can have for a range of conditions?
You're quite right. I came out to Australia when I was 13. I was did most of my education here, went to university, did law, and then became an investment banker. And that was a fabulous career. I entered it at the right time. The whole field was rising in terms of demand, and I loved it. But as I became more successful as an investment banker, I started to realise that something was missing. And what was missing was that being an investment banker was very egocentric. It was all about doing difficult deals, rating yourself in terms of how much work you got, all that sort of stuff. And what I realised I was missing was community. And the older I got, the more I realised how lucky I'd become. I'm healthy, I'm intelligent. I came to Australia at the right time. That's all luck. And it was luck that actually helped me to be successful in business. I reckon it's 90% luck, 10% determination. People in labouring jobs work just as hard as I've ever worked. As I felt more and more lucky, there was a need to be involved in community and start using whatever gifts that I've got to help other people. And it became addictive. The more I did it, the more I loved it. And I loved it because I could see, I got feedback about the effect that I was having. And that led me to start a number of charities and support a number of charities. I got involved in, the general theme of the work that I do is helping disadvantaged people who haven't had the luck in life that I've had. And
you've been a big sponsor of like women's refuges and shelters, these types of things.
Yeah, a lot of work in the homelessness area.
Yep.
But it became pretty obvious the more I got involved in this that you could provide whatever support, but if the person had mental illness, it was really hard to help them because the mental illness was literally took over their lives. And when you deal with disadvantaged people, what you find is that despite the fact that mental illness is already at high levels in our society, it's even at high levels with people who are suffering disadvantage. So that got me interested in the whole mental illness space. At the same time, my wife came across a research article. My wife's Jewish, and the research article was about a trial in New York, which was all about using psilocybin, one psilocybin dose, to help people deal with the trauma of a terminal illness. In other words, you're told tomorrow you've got cancer, stage 4 cancer, you've got 6 months to live. You go into a complete funk, you're depressed, you're anxious. So the remaining part of your life actually is not that great because you really haven't got quality of life anymore. They found with just a single dose of psilocybin in the right environment, the depression, the anxiety went away, and the person could live the balance of their life without that anxiety, in peace, at peace with the dying process. What caught her attention was the fact that one of the people on the trial was a Holocaust survivor. And my wife could identify with that because she lost most of her family in the Holocaust. She then reached out to researchers around the world and she told me about it and got me to read the research. And what we found was that there was something very serious here. There was a lot of research supporting the fact that psilocybin used effectively can create an enormous difference to people with depression, with anxiety, and with other mental illnesses.
Fascinating. So you've sort of stumbled into this area. It's piqued your interest because wherever we look, in terms of incarceration rates, homelessness, disadvantage, there's
Domestic violence.
domestic violence. There's usually some underlying mental health issue, and we sort of tend to focus on the outcomes of that that poor mental health rather than the causes of it.
Yep.
So you discover psilocybin's working, and it's not on its own. It's a cohort of let's call them drugs or therapies that could be effective in dealing with some of the most intractable mental health issues. But it's a rediscovery, isn't it? It's a renaissance. Because humans have been using psychedelics for a long time, haven't we? Because psilocybin is essentially the compound found in magic mushrooms.
Yeah, well, that's exactly the point. And when you look back through history, it's quite evident that psilocybin has been used for medicinal stroke ceremonial purposes, really probably from the dawn of humanity. There's evidence from Roman times, there's evidence from Greek times. So it's been around a long time. Unfortunately, what happened was that it was rediscovered in the 50s and 60s. Psychiatrists were using it a lot with their patients. There were over 40,000 patients treated in the late 50s and 1960s. It was shown to be safe and pretty effective. And then, unfortunately, Nixon came out and announced his war on drugs. He attacked people on psychedelics because a lot of those people on psychedelics were in the anti-war movement. So he wanted to stop that. And the way he chose to stop it was to make the use of psychedelics illegal.
Because one of the sort of side effects, I suppose, of psychedelics is it makes you think about the world and yourself in different ways. And so people became more critical in their in terms of contemplating themselves, their society, and it was a key part of the sort of counterculture revolution where people were thinking about feminism, environmentalism, civil rights. It was a massive threat to the hegemony at the time, wasn't it?
Yeah, very much so. And by the way, what you've just touched upon is why psilocybin is so effective. Because, at the heart of depression is disconnection. No one loves me. I haven't got a future. I don't feel good about myself. And that goes round and round in a person's mind with depression. Yeah, you do the psilocybin trip in the right circumstances, and invariably people come out of that trip saying they feel incredibly connected, which is what you've just talked about. And if you feel incredibly connected, a therapist can work with you to bring that sense of connection back into your life. And if they do that, you've no longer got depression.
So it was, I think it was Hoffman who synthesized lysergic acid, LSD, sort of discovered that the incredibly profound impact that had on him, a very positive one. So there was this awakening in the 50s and 60s, then this dampening down. But since then, we've had this massive, for a whole range of reasons, this epidemic of depression, treatment-resistant depression, suicidality, PTSD that have been very hard for us to deal with. There was a cohort of drugs out there, SSRIs, that we've, Prozac and these types of things. They really came along in the 80s, didn't they? And really filled up that space.
They did, and a cynic would say that because they came along, there was a lot of effort by the pharma companies to make sure that the war on drugs continued, because psychedelics have much better remission rates than SSRIs. To give you a feel for SSRIs, it's estimated that they lead to remission in only about 30% of patients who take them. So if you've got depression, you go on SSRIs, you've maybe got a 30% chance of going into remission. But it's even worse than that because half of that 30% would have got well anyway. So it's actually saying that the effectiveness of SSRIs in terms of remission is about 15% of patients.
And that's a damning number. And it's also that they take a long time to not work in a lot of cases, don't they? You've got to be on them for months, years, and there's a lot of other impacts they can have on your life.
Well, indeed. I mean, firstly, if you want to come off them, they can have nasty withdrawal symptoms. Secondly, when you're on SSRIs, they can have nasty side effects, nausea, sexual dysfunction. Sexual dysfunction is a real issue because if you're in a relationship and you start taking SSRIs and you start getting sexual dysfunction, then the intimacy that a couple actually want to have can get damaged. So it can damage relationships. As I say, they're difficult to withdraw from. The other problem with SSRIs, and I'm not, they work for some people, so I just want to emphasize that I'm not sort of just attacking SSRIs, but the other problem with SSRIs is if you want to actually reinforce in somebody that they have depression, you give them a daily pill so that every time they take that daily pill, they're saying to themselves, I'm taking this because I've got depression. It's a bit like Pavlov's dog,
It's negative feedback.
It's negative feedback all the time, whereas really what you want them to think about is actually what's good about life. And that's where psilocybin can be so effective, because if you come out of the psilocybin experience feeling connected, that is the antithesis of depression.
So how, because once again, the knowledge has re-emerged.
Yep.
And it's been over the last 20 years, I suppose. In the early 2000s, we've had these researchers like Professor David Nutt and others look at what's this knowledge, look at the effectiveness of this range of psychedelics like mescaline, MDMA, psilocybin, ketamine. How did that come about? And what was the progenitor of that? Why have we had another renaissance in terms of, but this time I think a bit more formalized and backed up by a lot of research. How did that come about?
Yeah, well, when the war on drugs started in the late 1960s, early 70s, you could still do research on psychedelic medicines, but the problem was they got such a bad name that you couldn't get funding. And that meant that the research dried up really until the late 1990s. And it took some, very brave researchers, frankly, to get back into that area because it had such a bad name. And over the years, as they've got better and better results, or they've confirmed really good results, it's attracted more researchers. But, the first 10 years after the late 1990s, it was pretty sparse. It's really been in the last sort of 15 years that it's accelerated. What's been driving it? What's been driving it is actually the elephant in the room with the mental health sector is lack of treatment efficacy. The outcome, we talked about the outcomes for SSRIs. If you go through all the psychiatric drugs, none of them are actually that great. So if you're a neuropharmacologist, for example, or you're a researcher into mental illness, what you're looking for is a new way of treating people to get better results. And the more they looked at psychedelic medicines, the more it became clear that one, they could be used safely, and two, they had large relative effect size.
And so, what have been the effects? What have we been learning over the last 15 years? Because I was fascinated in Professor Nutt's book about the default mode network. Yep. Basically, this orchestra, like the conductor, the orchestral conductor in your mind, yep, basically in charge of all the other parts of your brain. And just that's the default mode, and that psychedelics don't actually turn your brain on; they turn parts of your brain off, which I think is a really fascinating thing. Essentially your ego, the way that you have been thinking about things, about yourself, the way you literally construct your worldview, that quietens down on psychedelics, doesn't it? Can you talk about that?
It's fascinating. When they started doing the research again with psychedelics, the thinking was that because a psychedelic experience is such a dramatic experience, it must mean that the brain is really switched on. So what they did is they started putting people on psilocybin into a scanner, a brain scanner. And what they found...
An
MRI brain scanner, yeah.
On a trip.
On a trip. I've got to say, I'm not sure.
Not my favourite place to hang out.
I'm not finding claustrophobic anyway. But what they found, which was really remarkable, was that particular parts of the brain, which normally lit up, actually had gone off. They'd just stopped, or they'd quietened down. And the heat map, if you like, showed that they really weren't active. And it just happened to be what you've referred to as the default mode network, the controller in your brain, the conductor of the orchestra. And when that turns off, and it's a conductor of the orchestra in somebody who's got depression that keeps saying, I can't deal with life, it's too hard, no one loves me, I haven't got a future, I can't find work, I'm a victim. And it goes round and round in circles because the conductor has started to sort of get into a groove. What happens with psilocybin?
It's just on that point though. It's really interesting you say a groove because I think Michael Pollan described it as that. It's as if in your life you're going out skiing in the afternoon, and you're skiing down the moguls that you've created in your life, and so you go down the same path again and again and again. With psychedelics, it's first thing in the morning, groomed field. Those rails, those pathways aren't there. You're not on this track into this one type of thought.
That's exactly right. You know, one of the bits of information that really struck me as fascinating is that people with depression actually that their ego is too big because all they're thinking about is themselves and their position in life and why life is unfair, and it goes round and round and round, and that's the grooves that you just highlighted.
I think William Blake described it as the manacled mind.
Yeah.
You manacle yourself. You put yourself in this train of thought.
Indeed, and you can't get out of it. It's like those grooves on the ski field. You go into the psychedelic experience, the default mode network switches off and your mind just floats. And that's why when people come out of the experience, so often they're saying, God, I feel really connected because the brain has been freed. It's been freed of that controller. And as I say, if you can free a person of that controller for a period of time, when they come out of the experience, that stays with them for a few weeks. And if in that period you can really help them to integrate the experience so the connection becomes more permanent, they've no longer got depression. That's a completely counter-cultural way of thinking about medical treatment. Now, the way we think about medical treatment in our society is let's take a pill. And what the pill does is it smothers the problem. So yeah, it might help with your depression, but it also affects the quality of your life because you don't get the high points, the exciting points anymore. This is completely the opposite. What this is doing is that it's actually going to the heart of the problem, which is disconnection, and helping you feel more connected again.
It's amazing because like this concept of priors, we think about like perception, that we're seeing things in real time and making everything up. But in actual fact, the way our brain works is that it has these parts of it that are relying on what it has already learnt.
Absolutely.
And so when we see things, we think we're just seeing it as a video, but in actual fact, sure, we're getting the photons through our eyeballs, but our brain goes, well, I know what Peter Hunt looks like. I know where I am. I know what this sound is. And then it's almost like this, it makes the story up itself. That's how perception works. And the priors, that prior learning we have is absolutely fundamental to our experience in real time. So resetting that, how we form those or getting rid of those priors for a moment is really fundamental to being able to reset, get some clarity and think differently about ourselves and the world, isn't it?
It's exactly right. And it also highlights why therapy by itself is so challenging. Because, if you've got depression or if you've got post-traumatic stress disorder, you might try the pharmaceuticals, but if they don't work for you, then the only other alternative is therapy. Now, the problem with therapy is that if you've got, for example, trauma, what I, as your therapist, are trying to do is actually get you to start talking about the events that led to the trauma. Because if you can talk about it in an environment where you feel safe, then actually it becomes less traumatic. Those memories become less traumatic for you. The problem is that the typical reaction of somebody when they're asked to go back to the events that caused the trauma, you were molested as a kid, you were a soldier in Afghanistan, whatever it is, you're in a terrible car crash. The typical reaction of a person who's traumatized is that fight or flight response. In other words, they can't actually talk about it. It's too painful. And that's
some people can't even remember it.
Or they indeed.
They're triggered by it, but it's in a part of their brain.
It's switched off.
Switched off. They just go, we don't go near that because it's just too difficult.
Too difficult. Now, a lot of this is in the unconscious part of the brain. And so what the therapist is trying to do is dig down into that unconsciousness and bring it to the surface without triggering you. And that's really challenging. And that's why in about 20% of therapy, the patient actually gets worse, not better. So it's really, really tricky. The beauty of these medicinal therapies is that you're getting the patient in the right frame of mind, if you like, the right feeling to be able to experience something in a new way, be it psilocybin for depression or MDMA for post-traumatic stress disorder.
And what we're talking about here, we're not talking about people self-medicating and sorting it out themselves. That's not what we're talking about. And some people do that, and that can be dangerous. That really can be. Because, but what we're talking about here is psychedelic-assisted therapy. That's what we're really talking about. Going to a place where you've got a set and setting. So, like, I have experimented with psychedelics. I think a lot of people have. And a lot of it came down to how I was feeling at the time and where I was and the people that were around me. And, you know, I've had great trips and they were in beautiful places with great people feeling good. But I've had some bad times too. You know, one in a Thai restaurant in Newtown that was just, this guy brought out a fish head and I was off into an absolute nightmare. This guy had a fish head in front of me and I was unwell for a whole night. But set and setting is absolutely fundamental, and having it like a psychiatrist or a therapist there with you to guide you through your memories, through your feelings, through your experience. So talk to us about that.
Yeah, the way the therapy works is that it starts with a meeting or a consultation with a psychiatrist. And what the psychiatrist is doing is making an assessment of you. Now, you say you've got treatment-resistant depression. Is that the case? What is your background? What could be the causes? Really getting to know you, but also making sure that you don't have what's called contraindications. So things that actually could make taking the medicine inappropriate. So, for example, one of the contraindications at the moment is psychosis. If you've had a history of psychosis, these therapies aren't available to you. Once you've gone through that assessment process with a psychiatrist and he confirms that you come within the treatment-resistant depression or post-traumatic stress disorder definition, he'll talk through with you how it all works and seek your informed consent. And in doing that, you know, he'll explain, as I say, how it works. He'll explain other treatment alternatives. But the whole idea is that if you consent, it's based upon really understanding what this is all about. Once you've consented, you go through what's called preparation, and that's, you know, 2 or 3 sessions with a therapist, perhaps a psychiatrist or a psychologist or psychotherapist. And the whole idea of preparation is for the therapist who's going to be in the room with you during the dosing session to get to know you and for you to get comfortable with that person. Having done that, you then go into the actual medicine dosing session, and that's done in a clinical environment. As you say, you never get to take the medicines home.
So tell us what a clinical environment is.
It's a room with enough space for a bed or a couch to lie on. It will have 2 chairs because there'll be 2 therapists in the room with you at all times. It's designed to be an attractive environment.
That's important, isn't it? You don't want to do this in a fluoro lit hospital ward. No. You want some aromatherapy and someone massaging your feet, and you want to feel comfortable. You want to be comfortable.
So, you know, ideally there's a few plants there. The walls are nicely painted. There may be some natural light, but you feel comfortable.
Yep.
Then you'll be invited to lie down on the couch or the bed, and you'll be offered eye shades. You'll have agreed in advance what the music will be. Because music actually can enhance or does enhance the whole experience. And then you'll be given the medicine. And you've taken psychedelics, so have I. You know, the first time I took psychedelic, psilocybin, nothing happened for half an hour, and I thought, well, this is ridiculous, you know.
That's a trap for young players, that one.
And then suddenly it just happens.
Boom.
And so the whole idea behind the setup is for the patient to feel comfortable, because they're going to go into an experience where they no longer have direct control, where they're going into their mind and they're not thinking about normal day-to-day activities. They're being freed, if you like, in their mind. They've probably got eye shades on at this stage. They've probably got earphones. There's some beautiful music playing, and they literally go into another world. And with psilocybin, that can last maybe 6 hours. They'll come out of that experience periodically. Every time you come out of the experience, you think, well, it's over, and then it comes back again. But as I say, at the end of that sort of 6-7 hours, the aim is for your overriding experience to have been one of connection. Now, people talk about bad trips, and sometimes people have challenging trips. But the reason they're having a challenging trip is because they've got demons in their mind that they need to come to terms with. And the whole purpose of having trained therapists in the room is to give you comfort that you can get through those bad experiences.
And so what does the therapist do? Does the therapist ask you how you're going, or do they record what you're saying? How do they interact during this process?
Well, again, it's very different from typical normal therapy because, with normal therapy, the therapist is asking a lot of questions and giving some direction. Here, the therapists are trained to really to sit back and let the experience emerge and to be there if needed, but not to interfere with the experience. So, for example, if somebody is going through a difficult period during the medicine dosing session because they are dealing with their own demons, simply holding out your hand as a therapist and holding the hand of the person can be enough to give them the comfort they need to get through the experience. The other thing that patients are told is that if you see something bad in your mind you've got to walk towards it, which is counter to everything we believe in life. If something is bad, you walk away from it. You're encouraged to walk towards it, and so often when you walk towards it in your mind, it evaporates. And that evaporation is, again, a huge lesson that all these demons are in your mind. They're not external. And if you can actually approach those demons and they evaporate, then you've learned an incredibly valuable lesson in life.
Fascinating. I totally concur. And so what has been, because this is, there are researchers all over the world moving into this area. What are the outcomes? What are we seeing in terms of treatment, resistant depression, with psilocybin, PTSD, with MDMA? What are some of the outcomes? What's the knowledge we're getting out of this this rediscovered process?
Well, let me start with MDMA first, because there's been the most evidence for MDMA, and it's got the furthest in clinical trials. We talked before about trauma and the fact that one of the challenges with treating somebody with trauma is that they can get triggered. They don't want to remember what actually happened because it's too traumatic for them. What MDMA does is different from psilocybin. What MDMA does is, again, you go into that medicine dosing room, you lie on the bed or the couch, you might have eye shades on, there'll be some beautiful music. You take the MDMA, and I should actually add, Jeremy, that we're talking about medical grade GMP MDMA. We're not talking about adulterated stuff that you can get on the street. This is pure pharmaceutical grade MDMA. You're given the MDMA. Again, it takes about half an hour to have effect. You don't go into a complete altered state like you do with psilocybin, but boy, do you feel good. In other words, what's happening with MDMA is that your defense mechanisms are being settled down. You feel like you're in an incredibly loving and supportive environment. You feel much more at peace with yourself. And it's within that environment that the therapist can start talking to you about what happened to you. And the beauty then is that you're able to talk about the traumatic events without the fight or flight response coming in, because you feel safe and you feel loved. And because you can then start talking about those traumatic events and what happened to you, your last memory of those events is being able to talk about them when you felt safe. And if you can talk about them and feel safe, then you're getting over the trauma. You're getting into remission. And that's why MDMA is so, so effective. Now, what they found in clinical trials is that the remission rates are somewhere between about 65 and 70%. Now, that compares with current remission rates of probably 10 to 15% using current modalities. So you get remission of 65 to 70% of people. But here's where it gets interesting. In the months that follow, probably an additional 10% go into remission. So so that MDMA keeps working, and you end up with somewhere between 70 and 80% of people going into remission. But even those who don't go into remission get some benefit.
It's amazing that the reference point becomes not the trauma. I can't talk about it. The reference point becomes, I had an issue. I can talk about it.
That's right.
And so, and I can be honest about what the impact it had on me. And so we see it with so many veterans, first responders, police officers who've physically experienced something terrible. They've had an assault or seen something terrible. It's highly effective in this area, isn't it?
It's highly effective. And one thing we should all remember is it's not the event that causes the trauma. It's your reaction to the event. So you and I can be in exactly the same car crash. You can end up traumatized. I end up not traumatized. It's the way our individual brains deal with the events. It's very personal to an individual. And because it's the way your mind deals with an event, you've got to deal with that. It's not the event, it's the way you deal with that event. And
or not deal with it.
Or not deal with it. And the beauty of being able to talk about it is that suddenly you can start rationalizing it in your mind. This happened 10 years ago. It was terrible, but I'm alive today. I'm healthy. I can walk around. I can enjoy the sunshine. I can swim in the sea.
I didn't feel okay, and it's okay not to feel okay.
That's right. Exactly right. So that's MDMA. With psilocybin, that they're finding remission rates at least double the SSRIs and therapy. Some as high as 60 to 70%. So again, it's for people with depression who can't find any treatment that works for them. That's the hardest, most difficult group of patients with depression. We're seeing pretty high remission rates, way above remission rates using traditional therapy stroke SSRIs.
Well, that is just fantastic news and something that we've got to really get behind, because we've got an epidemic of suicidality, treatment resistant depression, and anyone who's watching this, who's triggered by this, or reach out to someone, or if you're feeling that way, that there's Lifeline, there's services out there for you, and have hope, because there is a wave of therapies that are being developed in a range of different forms, because it's not just like a large dose, like a macro dose of these drugs that you can take. There's a lot of research being done about sort of almost imperceptible doses, micro dosing. I went and saw some researchers at UNSW who are really talking about looking at some of the compounds in psilocybin as a microdose that people could take on a daily basis. That's operating really at a tiny level behind the scenes, almost imperceptible, but really changing brain chemistry. So let's talk about that, the microdosing, and what we're learning about that.
Yeah, well, firstly, the evidence is not as far advanced for microdosing as it is for full dosing, but there's a lot of anecdotal evidence, and you've probably microdosed, I've microdosed, and I know that when I do, it makes my brain feel much more switched on, much more focused. If I have a major presentation to give and I take a tiny microdose, it actually has a big impact. Now, the reason I'm talking about that is I talked before about the fact that one of the problems with SSRIs is you're taking them daily, and every time you take an SSRI, it's reminding you that you have a mental illness. The beauty of microdosing is actually the reverse. If you've come out of a full dosing experience feeling incredibly connected, then what probably microdosing would do for you is every time you microdose, it reminds you of that feeling of connection. So it's a positive ritual rather than what can be potentially a negative ritual with antidepressants.
So let's wind back a bit, Peter, because let's talk about the regulation, because we got up to the point about talking about the research and now what we're learning about this and the incredibly thrilling results we're seeing in terms of mental health outcomes. But there's a barrier to this. There has been a barrier, and that's where you come in. Yep. You've discovered this research. you get involved, you start Mind Medicine Australia.
Yep.
And so you've gone to work lobbying the shit out of everyone that
Yep.
you can about, and you've got some key allies like Andrew Robb,
Yep.
former Howard cabinet minister, finance minister, very, very influential and connected guy. You've got some key allies. You start Mind Medicine. Walk us through the pathway from Mind Medicine Australia now to Australia being at the regulatory sort of leading edge of the change that's happening in this exciting area of therapy.
Yeah, but it's definitely exciting. Yes, we started Mind Medicine in early 2019. At that stage, Australia really was a backwater in terms of the use of these therapies. There was very little research taking place, a lot of hubris and almost antagonism amongst some in the medical community about psychedelics. We set up Mind Medicine with the express intent of not only legalizing the medical use of these therapies, but scaling them. In other words, our ambition is to ensure that every Australian who needs access to these therapies, irrespective of where they live and irrespective of their financial circumstances, can get access.
And also, really important point, but also that there's the training there.
Absolutely.
There's the training for
Absolutely.
the medical professionals, so that that you've got the actual people with the skills to develop the therapy. So you've got this multi-pronged.
Yeah, there's really 4 core strategies, and they've been consistent right from the start. The first was awareness building. So really we've done so many presentations to psychologists, psychiatrists, doctors, members of the public, politicians, regulators, really to get them up the learning curve with the research, because it's all too easy for people to express opinions based upon prejudice. But when you present the research outcomes to them, it's much harder for them to be anti. And what we found was if we took the time to present the research findings, a lot of people out there were prepared to change their views on psychedelics. So that was the first task. The second task is that at this stage, psychedelic use was illegal for medical purposes. So, and you've just mentioned it, what we then said is, look, we will never get this legalized unless we have trained clinicians, because the regulator will always say, Peter, the research sounds good, but no one knows how to do it. So we set up a training school. And if you look at our website, we've got the most extraordinary clinicians and researchers on our faculty.
Hundreds of them.
Hundreds of them. We've now trained over 500 clinicians, so psychiatrists, psychologists, psychotherapists. So we have a pool of people in Australia who do know how to do
And
this.
these people aren't idiots. These people have done, they're MDs, then they've done, they're psychiatrists. They've done, basically a decade at uni studying, and then they've had like decades of working in this field. They recognise the value
That's
here,
exactly
and they're
right.
training up.
They're training up, and we're now training about 100 clinicians a year. And we just think that's going to accelerate as more and more clinicians understand the benefits and more patients demand access. The third area then is all the practical things you need to do to get something legalized and scaled. So that led to a major, that led to a rescheduling application to move these substances from Schedule 9 of the poison standard, which is prohibited substance, no therapeutic value, to Schedule 8, which is controlled medicine. That process took us 3 years. It involved a massive public campaign to support our application.
Because you had to do that at a federal and a state level across the country.
We had to do it at primarily a federal level.
And then the states followed.
But the states followed. But the states give impact into the federal decision. So you've got to get the states at least neutral, hopefully on side. That took us about 3 years. Massive public campaign. We had over 13,000 submissions being lodged from clinicians, researchers, members of the public to the TGA. That's more than they've ever received, way more than they've ever received for a medicine rescheduling. They were 96, 97% in favour, so massive support. And the net result of that was that in January 2023, the TGA announced the rescheduling of these substances. Psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression, MDMA for post-traumatic stress disorder. The prescriber has to be a psychiatrist. So that was done. Now we're working. Then the next step was obviously, well, that's great, but where do you get the medicines from? Because these medicines have been illegal now for 50 years. So we've now become the largest importer of these medicines into Australia. We import from a GMP pharmaceutical manufacturer based in Canada. We've done a really good deal with them because we wanted to keep medicine costs down. And we now provide, through a local pharmacist, these medicines to the psychiatrists so they can use with their patients. So that was done. And now we're working with clinics on clinics opening and providing these therapies and all the logistics that goes into making sure that somebody has a good experience and intensive therapy over the course of 3 months.
And that's where we started working together, is because the setting that we had regulations that were getting in the way of basically the effective therapy. There was regulations that were. Well, you explain it. You explain what we were up against.
Yeah, you've got to love Australia because of the federal system, but I mean, basically what happens is that you change the poison standard, you move these medicines to Schedule 8, and that then flows through under the cooperative scheme into all the poison standards of all the individual states and territories. So at that stage, every state and territory recognises these substances as Schedule 8 medicines. The problem is each state and territory put a different regulatory environment around the use of these medicines. So Victoria...
Where they could be used.
And how.
And how.
So, Queensland, for example, very liberal. I mean, basically, a psychiatrist can prescribe. Very little regulatory controls other than that. Victoria, again, quite liberal. It basically said that a psychiatrist had to notify the state government 7 days before a dosing session of the patient, but also went on to say that if you don't hear back from us within those 7 days, go ahead and do the dosing. So again, very straightforward. New South Wales said, well, we're more cautious. We believe that these therapies, these medicine dosing sessions, should only occur in a private hospital. Now, the problem with that is, one, there's a lack of private hospital capacity, but two, it increases the cost. And you've got to bear in mind that these therapies aren't on the pharmaceutical benefit scheme or the medical benefit scheme.
They cost tens of thousands.
They cost tens of thousands. So,
for the medicine itself, but for the psychiatrist, for the therapist, for the setting, the whole thing.
The whole thing. So, insisting that it be done in a private hospital adds logistics and it adds a lot of cost. And that's where you and I started talking, because there was, to us, zero justification for that restriction. And you spoke, very eloquently in Parliament about that. And, to the credit of the New South Wales government, after a period of discussion, they have changed that rule. So these therapies no longer have to be...
Shout out to Rose Jackson for her work there.
Yeah.
And, we bit of lobbying, bit of arm twisting, but, with coherent and eloquent advocates like yourself, we got there, mate.
We got there, and it's great because this is the most populous state, and a lot of states around Australia do look at what's happening in New South Wales, and to see that change, we were delighted. And
where are we up to? Are we seeing people utilising these therapies in a clinical setting yet in New South Wales?
Yeah, it's just starting.
Just starting now.
In fact, one of the centres in New South Wales would be one of the top centres for these therapies in terms of the number of patients treated.
Amazing. And what do we expect to see? Do we expect to see dozens, hundreds, potentially thousands of people availing themselves of these therapies in the coming years?
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be exactly the experience with medicinal cannabis. You remember back in 2016, which I think is when it became legalised. In the first year, there weren't many people who got prescriptions. Now there's been well over a million prescriptions given. You have that exponential increase as people get more and more comfortable and people see the results. And with these psychedelic medicines, what we saw was that after the rescheduling, it took a whole year because it was a very prescriptive scheme and psychiatrists had to be authorised by the TGA. It took about 12 months for the first patient to be treated. So the first patient was treated in 2024. During 2024, about 100 patients were treated. This year, we expect it's going to be probably 200, 250.
And what are the outcomes we're seeing?
Oh, fabulous outcomes.
Life-saving.
Life-changing.
I'll
give you one example. one example.
Please do.
A lady in Western Australia suffered from anxiety and depression, hadn't left the house on her own for over 10 years, would really only leave the house in the company of somebody else to go and visit the doctor or something that was essential. So she was leading a pretty dismal life. After one dose of MDMA in a therapeutic setting with a psychiatrist and a therapist, shortly after that, she rang up the psychiatrist and said, "You'll never believe this, but today I caught the local bus by myself to the local shopping centre, and I wandered around the shopping centre and then caught the bus home." Now, for you and I, that's sort of trivial, but for somebody who's been locked away in a house for 10 years, living a really, really unpleasant life, that's revolutionary for that person. It's the start of freedom. So we are getting some extraordinary results.
Amazing.
The other thing I should say we're doing is we're working with the Australian National University, funding a registry that they're overseeing, and that's designed to get direct feedback from the psychiatrist and the patients about the treatments and their effectiveness. And that means that over time, we're going to collate a lot of what they call real-world information to demonstrate just how effective these treatments are.
Who else is doing some research in this area? Is there research money flowing into this area? Are there other institutions that are grasping the nettle of the opportunity here?
Yeah, there's a lot of research taking place now. I mean, when we started, there was just,
in Australia,
there was just one trial that had just started. Now there'd be, I'm guessing, about over 20 trials taking place, maybe more than that.
Amazing.
At various stages. One of the things we did is we advocated to the Commonwealth Government to provide grant funding. And back in the Morrison government days, they stepped up and provided $10 million worth of grant funding, which at the time was the largest government contribution to psychedelic therapy research in the world. So, Australia has done pretty well. It's stepped up. Government have come in and provided significant grant funding. We're the first country in the world to reschedule these medicines. We're the only country in the world where a psychiatrist, once he becomes an authorised prescriber, can prescribe these medicines without getting special exemptions on a patient-by-patient basis from governments. Australia really is pulling away from the field at the moment, and all credit to the people involved.
Well, it's all credit to you. We've gone from a laggard from zero to hero in just 6 or 7 years, and it does come down to articulate advocates armed with the evidence, getting out there and putting forward a solution to an incredibly difficult problem that I think could affect has impacted so many people. Poor mental health it preoccupies so many of our policymakers in a whole range of areas of the impact socioeconomically, the impact of homelessness,
absolutely,
violence, incarceration.
Massive.
Yeah, it is absolutely massive, and you've done an incredible job of removing the stigma that was essentially, and this is where we started. It was a construct. It was artifice, wasn't it?
Yep.
It was a political decision to create a stigma around a compound, around a drug, around a therapy, and that's disappearing.
It's disappearing. I mean, now when we talk to people about these therapies, we very rarely get pushback. In the early days, we got a huge amount of pushback. So as you say, the environment has changed, the atmosphere has changed. It's changed partly because I think more and more people realise that the elephant in the room with our mental health system actually is not lack of resources. I mean, that's an issue, but it's actually not the fundamental issue. The fundamental issue is that the treatments that we have aren't very good. Most people who come into the sector because they're mentally ill don't leave the sector in remission. It's a massive failure. There's been virtually no innovation in the sector as far as treatments are concerned for more than 50 years. I mean, it really is a horror story. The beauty of these therapies, they're the biggest innovation in mental health for 50 years. The beauty is that they drive high remission rates. They're shown to be safe in medical environments in terms of usage. They do it by getting to the root cause of the problem. They don't smother the problem like an SSRI. In the case of depression, the root cause of the problem tends to be disconnection. I don't feel good about myself. I don't feel part of this society. I'm not part of this community. No one loves me. It gets to the core of that by giving the person a sense of connection.
I saw a study, and that was that the greatest predictor of longevity and happiness was connection. If you're a volunteer, if you're joining things, literally, physically and mentally joining with people, volunteerism and that connection that comes with it is an incredible predictor of a happy long life. People who turn up at the Surf Life Saving Club and join those organisations generally live happier, longer lives. But you've got to feel like doing that as well.
That's
right.
right.
And so we've got to give people the tools, the capacities to put themselves in a space to do that, which is what you're talking about.
Yeah, and again, you meet a volunteer, and invariably they've got a smile on their face, and yeah, they're helping you, but actually they're enjoying helping you, and you're dead right. If you feel good about yourself, that is I think a predictor of leading a healthy life.
Well, Peter, you should feel good about yourself because you've volunteered to lead this charity. You've put your money, you've put your reputation into this to incredible effect. And I think you're going to have, and your organisation and the health professionals, the researchers are going to have a profound impact on hundreds of millions of lives around the world with this ancient wisdom that these incredible compounds that we're rediscovering again. It's another renaissance, but it's an absolute credit to you. So I'm very pleased to work with you on this. I really appreciate the work that you're doing. Just before you go, what's coming up next? What are some of the what's before us now?
Well, what's coming up next is extending or expanding the number of mental illnesses that can be treated with these therapies, these medicinal therapies. We've just put in a rescheduling application alongside a palliative care group for the use of psilocybin for end-of-life distress. So, you're told tomorrow that you've got a stage 4 cancer. Your physician says, well, Jeremy, you've likely got six months left. The message that none of us ever want to hear. You go into a complete funk. You despair, you're depressed, you're anxious. So the remaining part of your life, however long that is, your quality of life is gone. What they found in research is just one dose of psilocybin for a person in that environment, that sense of self or lack of sense of self, just one dose of psilocybin in the right environment with the right set and setting, the majority of patients go into remission. In other words, the anxiety and despair goes, peacefulness comes into their life, and it means that for the last period of their life, however long that is, they're at peace with the dying process, and they can spend it with family and loved ones without the enormous depression and rage and anger that can often go with a terminal diagnosis.
Well, what a human thing to do, to make people's end as pleasant as it could be, and as fulfilling and valuable, because we're maturing as a society when it comes to discussions about the whole range of things, including death. Because now we have in New South Wales voluntary assisted dying. We don't have to die in the most egregious of circumstances if we don't want. If we've got a terminal illness, we can choose the manner of our going and that's such a human thing to do, and also to make it as enjoyable as possible. To spend that time not thinking about your end, but thinking about your family, and being happy. What an important body of work to work on. So that is something I'll be more than happy to support you on as well.
Fantastic. And again, just to make a statement of the obvious, this is all voluntary. I mean, no one's forcing people to take psychedelic therapies. This is all voluntary. If somebody feels it's appropriate, if their clinician feels it's appropriate, if they're able to give informed consent, then in my view, why wouldn't you make it available to an individual?
Exactly. It's liberty, and if people have given the option, no one's forcing them to do it. They're educated. They understand it. They opt into this. then and as you say, well, with full consent, well, why not have that as an addendum to to all the other things that we can do to make people's lives better?
Exactly.
So look, Peter, you are making people's lives better. I feel better from just having talked to you, and I haven't even had any magic mushrooms or psilocybin. But this is an incredibly exciting area. We're formalising our understanding of how these therapies work. More credit to you, mate. More strength to your arm. Let's hope that we can get this rescheduling done, and we can impact more people's lives in a beneficial way. Thank you very much for the work you do, and thank you very much for spending a bit of time in the weeds talking about psychedelic-assisted therapies, mate.
No, well, thank you very much, Jeremy, and thank you from the bottom of my heart for the support that you've given us. You've been prepared to be outspoken, and you've been prepared to push this within the government. And it's having friends like you which makes, frankly, an enormous difference to our success.
Well, thank you very much, mate. Thanks for joining us. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. See you, everyone.